Hello and welcome to the Grove. Today we'll be looking at the complete timeline of Runterra by Noxus. Note that Noxus created this timeline, and it is the calendar/timeline Noxus presents and shares with other inhabitants of the world of Runterra. Anything included or omitted, intentionally or unintentionally, was decided by Noxus and not myself. With territory spread across Runterra, the Empire of Noxus has united and assimilated countless smaller nations over the course of centuries. Aside from its obvious military strength and stable central governance, Noxus takes great pride in bringing the calendar to every corner of the globe. Indeed, it is difficult to imagine a more pleasant euphemism for martial conquest. But to be Noxian is to subscribe to their notion of the world's history, which began long before the Rune Wars and gave rise to the Empire. Since many historical records were lost in those dark times, the precise details of anything earlier are likely based on conjecture or popular myth. 9,000 years before Noxus, the First Lands. Across the island continent now known as Ionia, a great war raged between mortals and a race of sky giants. Only by the intervention of the Vastaya Shirei, legendary beings of immense power existing in both the material and spirit realms simultaneously, was victory eventually won. 8,000 years before Noxus, War of the Three Sisters. After they defeated the old gods of the north, a feud developed between the sisters, Avarosa, Cyrilda, and Lysandra, and quickly escalated into open conflict. The final battle was fought at the gates of Lysandra's citadel, where she sacrificed many allies to entomb her enemies in true ice. 6,000 years before Noxus, a westward migration. Bringing all their ancient knowledge and wisdom with them, settlers from the forgotten lands of the distant east reached the shores of Shurima and Valoran. In time, their descendants would come to rule some of the greatest civilizations Runterra has ever known. 5,000 years before Noxus, the rise of the God Warriors. Guided by the divine aspects of Targon in preparation for some unknown future war, the ancient Shuramans used the sun disk at Neramazith to create the first Ascended. These noble beings were worshipped as living gods, and the empire they forged would endure for millennia. 2,500 years before Noxus, Acathia rebels against Shurima. In a desperate bid to cede from the tyranny of the Empire, Acathia unleashed the Void in battle. Their own capital city was instantly destroyed, the land tainted and corrupted beyond all recognition. Even the mighty Ascended hosts could do little to combat this horror, and Shurima was forced to abandon Acathia for good. 2,000 years before Noxus, Azir's failed ascension. Denied godhood by a base act of treachery, the last Shuraman emperor, Azir, was lost, along with the sun disk itself. The people, filled with fear and sorrow, looked to the remaining Ascended to protect them. 550 years before Noxus, the Great Darken War. Bereft of purpose and scarred by what they had endured in facing the Void, many of the Ascended became twisted in body and mind, naming themselves Darken, and raising hordes of mortal warriors to conquer the world. Eventually, the aspects who had inspired their creation were forced to intervene, imprisoning the Darken within their own accursed weapons. 25 years before Noxus, the Rune Nation. A terrible accident occurred in the arcane vault beneath the city of Helia, hidden away on the Blessed Isles. With the barrier between the material and spirit realms shattered, the souls of the dead were trapped in eternal torment within the coiling black mist, and the newly dubbed Shadow Isles were abandoned by all right-thinking mortals. 13 years before Noxus, the Rune Wars. With Helia lost, dangerous magical artifacts soon began to find their way into the wrong hands. On the fields outside Combe, the renowned mage Tyrus and his apprentice Rise witnessed the first devastating attack in the Rune Wars, a sight that would haunt Rise's nightmares for the rest of his unnaturally long life. 0. Noxus endures. The Rune Wars escalated across most of the known world. After a decade of almost apocalyptic battle, the last of the Noxi were forced to retreat inside the Immortal Bastion for shelter from the magical fallout. When they finally emerged, the land beyond had been ravaged, but they survived. They were alloyed as a single people, no longer Noxi, but Noxus, and have marked their calendar from this date ever since. 292 years after Noxus, the Demacian Crown. Far to the west, the nation founded by the great champion Orlan crowned its first king. Originally settled by refugees from the Rune Wars, it was declared that Demacia would be a sanctuary from magic, now and forevermore. 349 years after Noxus, Noxus becomes an imperial power. After a series of forced annexations and the fall of the Drakengate, the strength of Noxus grew to match its ambitions. The noble houses swore, though it might take 1,000 years, to unify all the nations of Runterra beneath a single banner, and elected a grand general to lead their war host to victory. 772 years after Noxus, tragedy on the River Pilt. Merchant clans controlling the trade routes between Valeron and Shurima accelerated the construction of vast access ways and conveyors. However, excavations for these sun gates undermined the ancient port city of Zan, plunging whole portions of the city into the lightless caverns beneath. 787 years after Noxus, Bilgewater. With more and more bedraggled fortune seekers washing up on their shores, missionaries from the Buhru granted these Palangi outsiders refuge in the southern island bays. While there were many years of cultural confusion, even including the name of the Serpent Isles, the settlement would eventually grow into a bustling port city in its own right. 984 years after Noxus, the invasion of Ionia. Following many years of scouting and preparation, Grand General Borum Darkwill ordered a large-scale occupation of Ionia by Noxian forces. Though initially met with little resistance, the warhost's brutal advances across the provinces soon gave rise to fierce retaliation from various Ionian militias, which became more organized after the infamous Battle of the Placidium. 989 years after Noxus, Jericho Swain seizes Noxus. In spite of his dishonorable discharge from the military, former General Swain enacted a coup within the Noxian capital, deposing and killing Borum Darkwill. In less than a year, Swain had ended the occupation of Ionia, vastly reduced the influence of the noble houses, and established the Triforix Council to govern the empire.